Kentucky Ancestors is brought to you with support from the Kentucky Historical Society Foundation.
Today on Kentucky Ancestors, our team of experts explores the history of a 19th century Kentucky family and uncovers their connections to life along several rivers in the Commonwealth. Our family question comes from Franklin County in central Kentucky. Join us as we share the details and explain the research methods that our experts at the Kentucky Historical Society use to document this story. Kentucky Ancestors starts now. Welcome to Kentucky Ancestors, presented by the Kentucky Historical Society. I'm your host, Heather French Henry. Join us for another episode as we reveal Kentucky's deep and diverse roots, one family at a time. This final episode of our second season is being filmed before a live studio audience of folks just like you who are interested in learning more about their Kentucky families. In the studio today is Jennifer Dean. Jennifer, it's so great to have you on the show today.
Thank you.
And you have brought some family with you today, so they're filling up the front row. Is this a family full of Deans?
It is.
Oh, that's so wonderful. Just wave hi. Look at you all, how beautiful you are. So have you always been interested in genealogy?
I've always liked history, and I think my grandmothers especially told a lot of stories about their childhood, the people they knew, and the things that they did, and I wanted to know more about those things.
Well, we're going to learn a lot more today. So you submitted a question to our team about your ancestor, William Dean. So what do you know about him right off the top?
I was told by my grandparents that he was on a boat on the Ohio River that sunk during the Civil War, and they said that the boat was named after him.
Interesting, and he had a tie to the river, so that makes some of our research really pertinent. So let's begin by telling the audience a little more about William Dean. So our staff has discovered that he was born in 1844 in Frankfort, Kentucky. He lived his entire life connected to the city and actually died there in 1914. In 1868, he married a woman named Saffronia Singleton of Woodford County. Put that on your baby name list, Saffronia Singleton, right? Together, they had several children, including your ancestor, Nathan Howard Dean. You mentioned that he was connected to work along the river. So what was William's connection to the rivers of Kentucky? So a few documents our researchers found can tell us a bit more. In the various census records during his lifetime, he was often listed as a laborer. His death certificate lists his occupation pretty clearly. So why don't you read that for us?
He was a riverman and worked on steamboats.
So, however, you will read what the 1880 census, which lists a different occupation for William. Can you read that?
In 1880, he was working at a sawmill.
Interesting, right? The differences, certainly. While that might not sound like river work, at the time, logs were actually floated downstream in huge rafts of connected timbers along Kentucky rivers to be processed at sawmills. In the 1914 Frankfort City Directory, William is once again listed as a laborer. However, it tells us that he worked for a certain company. Can you read the name of that company?
The J.B. Blanton Company.
This company is very important. So according to an oral history interview with Alice Blanton, the Blanton Company was very much connected to the river. So let's take a listen.
I worked most of my working life from my father at the J.B. Blanton Company, a building material firm. He started it in 1904 and incorporated it in 1905. He had a towboat and a pump boat and barges, and it started out dredging sand out of the Kentucky River, which is fine sand and used for mortar. And he also manufactured plaster. His plaster was used in the new Capitol when it was built. My great-grandfather, who built this house, had a lumber mill, He quarried the stone for the old Capitol.
Since your ancestor William was working for the Blanton Company at this time, how does it feel to know that your ancestors' work on the river actually contributed to the construction of our current Capitol building?
It's interesting. I had no idea.
I know, little tidbits we find, right? So you're connected. You need to go there and visit, certainly. Well, as we've already learned, the river itself provides occupational opportunities for people in many different ways. Before our first commercial break, let's learn about the river and how it influenced Kentucky communities from the Capital City Museum located in downtown Frankfort.
Frankfort is built on two bends of the river. The first people who surveyed here also came up the river, and they are responsible for what's called Leestown, which is the first settlement in Franklin County. The man that we have to thank for the commercial use of the river is General Wilkinson. And of course, he was quite the scoundrel. But he realized that the Kentucky River fed right into the Ohio, which fed right into the Mississippi, and in a journey of probably 15 days or something like that, you could be in New Orleans. Very, very early on, the river was kind of like a creek would be. There were places where it was very shallow, and when steamboats came in about, I think 1818 was the first steamboat, they had to wait for the river to be up. And soon they learned that we needed several dams on the Kentucky River to make it navigable all the time. Later on, logging came to eastern Kentucky, and the logs were rafted together. And then when we had a flood, usually in the spring, they would push those rafts into the river and ride the rafts down to Frankfort, where we had at one time 6 sawmills. One time Frankfort had 12 distilleries. Of course, many of them went out because of Prohibition, but there's a lot of memorabilia there. People who farmed or fished or lived in houseboats along the river were always mindful of when the river was coming up. And of course, when the river would get high, it would flood. The penitentiary was built down where the state office building is. You just look at it and you know it's just, a hell of a place to be. It was built on land owned by Andrew Holmes, and of course it's on Holmes Street. But it was not a very pleasant place because the prisoners were expected to work pretty hard. And of course the food was very poor and sickness was rampant. Men working very hard with a poor diet, the health was very bad. The interesting thing is that the superintendent could supplement his income by these industries. And so if the penitentiary made money, then the superintendent made money.
Hello, I'm Doug High, the director of the Kentucky Historical Society Foundation. We're a nonprofit organization that was created to support the Kentucky Historical Society and its mission to preserve and educate our shared Kentucky history in order to better meet the challenges of the future. And we do this through major gifts, grants, and endowments from groups and people just like you. Please consider a donation to the Kentucky Historical Society Foundation or by simply becoming a member at KHS.
Explore the past with the Kentucky Historical Society. Take a day trip to the capital city of Frankfort and visit the Kentucky History Center and museums. One ticket gives you access to 3 sites and endless Kentucky stories. Members receive great benefits like free admission and unlimited access to resources both in person and online. Your support helps important programs like Kentucky History Education, research, and exhibitions to reach communities across the state. Join now at history.ky.gov.